You are now listening to the Bullseye Podcast, brought to you by AFI Advisors. Sit back, get comfy, and keep all arms and legs inside the vehicle when in motion. And now, here is Josh, Peter, and Brian.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Bullseye Podcast, brought to you by AFI Advisors. I am Josh Shores, Director of Marketing and Development here at AFI. I'm joined alongside by Peter Raber.
Good morning.
President, and we have a very special guest this morning, Mr. Jeff Fleming. Jeff is the Relocation Manager, moved to Kingsport. And Jeff, thank you for coming.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
We've been trying to do this for a little bit now, and you're a busy man.
Well, not that busy. I should have gotten here a lot sooner.
You claim you're not busy, but I see you everywhere, and I see you on everything, so you're pretty busy.
Well, when Josh and I first started coming up with our list of people that we wanted to highlight, you were right at the top. You know, I think we started this maybe like a year ago of who would be really quality guests for us to have to provide information. So I'm really appreciative that you're able to get over here today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I really do.
Jeff, you have served in numerous roles with the city of Kingsport for over 35 years. Do you want to highlight some of those? Just give a quick little path of where you've been and how you got here?
Sure. So I started out as an intern from ETSU. And when I speak to leadership classes, I tell them that, God will open the doors that he's supposed to open and close the doors that he's supposed to close. And so I saw an advertisement for a City of Kingsport job posted on the bulletin board at ETSU, and I asked about it, and they said, well, you're not far enough along yet to be able to be eligible for that. Well, nobody else took it, so they called back and said, hey, are you still interested? So I got the job, and the internship expired in 6 months, and a full-time job became available. They offered it to two other people who turned it down. I was a third choice, so I stayed at that's how I got my foot in the door and stayed there for 35 years. Started out in city planning, which, I love how to study how things fit together and why and what you can do to control and direct the built environment. From there, I spent some time in public works and water and also solid waste. And then I was promoted to GIS manager. And at the time, that was a brand new concept. We think about GPS now, which is pretty much GIS.
Okay.
But you had to take every record and digitize it and make it electronic so it can be used. So we are the ones that literally sat there on a drafting board and traced every property line and attached all the information about who owns it. And so we learned that you had to deal with data cleanup. So we had to make sure all the street names were spelled the right way so they would match when you did queries and things like that. So that really triggered an interest in me in data and analyzing data and spatially analyzing data. And so that really became a skill set that I really have carried on with me the rest of my life.
That's really funny. I've always wondered who did that stuff.
Yeah.
Like who types all the street names in, who puts the plots together, stuff like that.
Yep.
So
It has to start somewhere. It makes me laugh because my first job when I started working with Dad when I was 11 was taking handwritten records. And at the time, we took them and put them into a predecessor of even Word and Works. It was First Choice, and it was a blue screen with yellow type. And you just were sitting there taking it from here, putting it to there so that it could be used somehow. And it's a tedious job, but if you like it, you can really get a lot out of it.
Well, once you kind of do that boots on the ground work, you begin to appreciate how many decisions were made with the best information they had available, but they didn't have the best information. And so in a city like Kingsport that was pretty cutting edge in getting involved in this stuff, it really allowed more sound decisions to be made, based on, we even looked at like where you send school buses to pick up school children and used algorithms to allocate the number of students per bus and make the route most efficient, not the most politically expedient. And so, it really has paid off dividends for our community.
Jeff, I can't help but think over 35 years of especially some of the roles you've been in. How do you do with people being frustrated with you? Because I feel like that would be an ever-recurring thing.
Absolutely. You develop a thick skin for one thing. For me, the way I coped with it was it's okay for them to be mad at the city or a policy just not me personally.
Yeah.
So don't shoot the messenger. And if it became personal, then it did bother me, but that rarely happened over my career. And as I was talking to Peter before we got on the podcast, a lot of folks come to the conclusions they come to because they don't have the same information we do. So I really enjoy helping them understand why we did what we did. And not every time, but a lot of times at the end they go, oh, well, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of say any reasonable person would come to the same conclusion. So the rest of them must just be unreasonable.
Well, misinformation and lack of information are things that we deal with every day. No matter what your industry is, the people you're dealing with, and we unfortunately have this channel to spread all of that to the world. Yep. And it just causes a lot of angst, a lot of anxiety. But what you said is true. People don't have all of the information that the folks have who are working on these things.
Right.
But to kind of blend in and move toward the Move Kingsport side of things, we really wanted to take a deeper dive into that, and we wanted to do something fun, and we thought myth busting might be fun. But before we get to that, I did want to read this. The ultimate goal of Move to Kingsport, the ideal community grows sustainably, fostering a vibrant economy that enhances the quality of life for all citizens.
Yep.
I like that. And then you also had another quote, I think from your grandma, that I didn't put on there because I thought you might want to pitch it in at some point in time. But can you tell me a little bit about how you ended up with Move to Kingsport and kind of your passion, desire behind that?
Sure, absolutely. So the quote from my grandmother was all things in moderation.
Yeah.
Except she wasn't referring to alcohol. So I
think that's what everyone thinks of whenever someone says moderation, just their brain.
Right. Yeah. But you want to have a community that is available to all price points, not just a posh suburb of a larger city. You want balance in all things. And so I feel like Kingsport really fits that bill, and we continue to strive to be that. So the way we created the Move to Kingsport program was in 1999. It was a couple of years after Eastman had a major layoff. And for the first time in the city's history, there was a lot of angst about the future of manufacturing and how many eggs in one basket that we had in our community. So we started taking inventory of our assets and realized that there were so many reasons why people might want to work or live in Kingsport. And when we started articulating those, we started to say, okay, now what are we going to do with it? This is before marketing was a thing, especially with government. And so we started initially with civic clubs saying, you're feeling bad about the community right now, but look at this. We won umpteen national awards for Keep America Beautiful. We have thousands of acres of public park space, and just articulating all those things. And then that parlayed into a relationship with a program called Retire Tennessee. Tennessee and Mississippi at the time were the only two states that were marketing to retirees as a place to move and bring your wealth with you. North Carolina has since joined in, and the other members of this community, which is called Ideal Living, are people like Del Webb Sun City, Hilton Head Lakes, any development in and around Wilmington, North Carolina, or Myrtle Beach. And so you take these government programs and you're in the same room with these high-priced developers who are trying to replicate community. And you realize we already have many of those same things. We have an aquatic center. We have an awesome YMCA. We have, Greenbelt Park and all those kinds of things. So what we do is we appeal to people that maybe want to live in a real place, not a, constructed place,
manufactured,
like it's like Disney. You want to go to Main Street USA, you're going to go to Main Street, because it's just a fake facade at Disney, but it's real people and real businesses in cities. So as time has changed and boomers are retiring, they are much more interested in not living in an age-restricted community. They're more interested in living in a real place where their grandkids are welcome, and they may not have exorbitant HOA fees, and their taxes are lower. And we just check so many of those boxes.
Kingsport's always, in my experience, been that. It is a real community. You get goods, bads, everything in between. And it does. My dad moved here from New York and found home. It was what he was looking for. He wasn't looking for, the craziness of a big city or the, I guess, as you said, kind of manufactured communities that you get in other places. And it's always been such a good place to raise a family, but then stay there. And, that's why I've stayed here.
Yep. It's amazing how many people move and then later the grandparents follow them.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what? I've seen a trend in that, and I didn't know that was a thing. Excuse me. I didn't know that was a thing until here recently, but I have noticed, having some friends relocate and things of that nature. Meemaw and Peepaw, they're right, but they're not too far behind because, why not?
Yeah.
You can go be with your family, spend all that time with them, and probably nice to have that freedom not to be necessarily tied down.
Right.
And I don't know what that's like, but seems like it would be great.
Well, I think you've seen a shift in the nuclear family used to be very much multi-generational. Yep. And then we got into an expansionary period in the United States, and people would move across country, and you would see, I grew up, I'd see my grandparents like twice a year because they were still up in New York, and we were down here. But now you are moving back partially because of financial reasons. It's better to have a support group that's around you. And then we've got a fluidity now that you can move. You can live somewhere that you didn't grow up. And then even if you're still working back in the place that you were from, I know personally, Kate's mom moved down here, when we had the twins, within like a year, and she's been here for 10 years. So yeah, because they're turning 10, which is wild to me.
I think when you have twins, though, I think it's fair.
Yeah, it's mandatory.
To take all the help you can get.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But we used to, that's how families used to work, and we got away from that. And I feel like we're kind of moving back towards it.
During COVID, a lot of folks did some soul searching, and a lot of folks came back home. That was a national thing, not just a Kingsport thing, because it when everything stopped and you realized what's important to me, how much is it costing, and what do I really value, they did some soul searching, and a lot of them came home. I noticed on my son's street, he lives on Watauga Street, and the last couple of houses that have turned over have been people his age who have come back from Research Triangle, or they've come back from, Atlanta, and they have a remote job, or one spouse works in healthcare and the other has a remote job, but they just decided to come back and be with their extended family. And so I'm encouraged by seeing those kinds of things happen.
Let's go ahead and just dive into the myths, because this is too much fun. I saw these and I was thinking, I hear people saying these things, but, Jeff, we can get as far in or out as you want with these, but one of the myths is only retirees are moving here. Right. We just have old people, Jeff.
Right. A lot of people think that, and, I go back to we had economic research associates out of Washington, D.C., who was here doing some work for Holston Defense and BAE Systems. And they ran the math for us back in, 25 years ago. And they told us what our median age was. So one of the reasons for creating the Move to Kingsport program was to soften that. So we didn't become a completely retirement community, because a lot of folks at that time that could retire from Eastman retired. The question was, who's going to fill their shoes? Or are they going to stay here, or are they going to take their wealth and go somewhere else? So as you track forward, knowing how significant the baby boomer bubble is in demographics, there's a cliff out there. And so you can look at the numbers now, and our median age is 44.6. That's not significantly different than it was 25 years ago. So either we're living longer or, we're replacing people with younger families. And so the Census Bureau provides a report that tells you how old people are, the median age, based on where they live, the same county, same state, different county, or out of state. And that number is 26.3 is the median age for relocating within the same county to Kingsport in the past 5 years. It's 35.8 if they moved from elsewhere in Tennessee, or it's 29.9 if they've moved from out of state.
Wow.
So those are pretty dramatic numbers, and those are numbers that I don't think people on the street locally would believe, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But that's what the Census Bureau says is happening.
Myth busted.
Exactly.
Right
well, these myths become part of the conversation, and we see it in everything. Something gets said often enough, it just starts to get believed. And, there's a couple, and one that I would throw out, because I'd love to know the truth on this, because I'm sure I've even repeated this. Johnson City grew faster than we did because they got their liquor license first.
Exactly.
That gets said all the time.
Right.
I'm sure it wasn't boiled down to that.
Right.
Similarly, all of a sudden they're growing because Eastman is allowing their executives to not live in the city limits, or it doesn't have to live in city limits.
Right.
You hear these things a lot.
Yeah.
And it may just be somebody's opinion of like they knew one person who, did that, or, it's the telephone game.
Yep. Speaking as a geography person, the Great Tennessee Valley goes all the way from basically Alabama up and converts into different names. It goes all the way up into New York. And there's a finite limit to that valley, right? So the southern edge is Johnson City and the northern edge is Kingsport, right? So in between Johnson City and Kingsport is the middle of the valley. Where was the one place that hadn't been developed up until about the 80s? The middle of the valley. Boones Creek, Gray. And so that's Washington County, that's Johnson City. So a lot of it has to do with that's just where the land was, and that's where the construction was taking place. And also the realization that as much as many of us old-timers may be entrenched in the idea that you live and work in the same city, there's nothing further from the truth than that anymore. People live in Kingsport, work in Greenville. They live in Johnson City and work in Bristol. And so whether we fully acknowledge it or not, we are one region and we ebb and flow all the time. Now, if you had moved to Knoxville and worked in Oak Ridge and lived in West Knoxville, nobody would have thought a thing about that. But the fact that the Tri-Cities are similar in size, there's a lot of competition of we want everybody to live here and work here and spend their money here. But really, it's more about how is the region growing dynamically.
Yeah. Well, and there's way more impact to be had, facing as a region rather than trying to do your own thing.
Absolutely.
But another myth was the idea that we don't have a lot of diversity moving into the area.
Right.
And I think that I've seen quite a bit personally here in Kingsport.
Right.
What do you think about that?
So when we talk to our major employers like Ballard and Eastman, they are attracting a global marketplace. And if a diverse individual is sitting in a big city somewhere and they're looking at a job opportunity in Northeast Tennessee, when they look at the basic stats, it's alarming to them because their assumptions about, am I going to be welcome? Is it so white and homogeneous for a reason? And the answer is no, it's not. We're open, we're welcoming, and we're moving in that direction. So, we had a quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes that we used to talk about. It's greatness is not where you are, but the direction you're headed. Mm. And so we just want to prove to people that anybody can live here of any background, race, ethnicity, faith, they're welcome here. So again, going back to those census numbers in the past 5 years, 19% of the city's Black-only citizens have moved here in the past 5 years. 18% of the city's multiracial citizens and 37% of the city's Hispanic and Latino citizens have moved here in the past 5 years. So we are becoming more diverse. And I'd also say that when you talk about multiracial, I've done census for, they do it every 10 years. So I've done it for at least 3 decades. And they've changed the definition of all these classifications. So just as an example, the only options you have typically are white, Black, American Indian, Pacific Islander, that sort of thing. Well, white is Caucasian. So if you are from the Middle East, for example, you are told to put Caucasian or white on your census. And so then they kept adding, we'll check all that apply. So now when you go and look at census data, you have to have 1 race, 2 races, 3 or more, 4 or more, 5 or more races. So we are becoming a much more multicultural society. And, I yearn for the day when we don't even have to talk about those things.
Sure. I bet. I'm sure you get that quite a bit. And kind of leading into the next myth is that, we're overrun by all of these out-of-state buyers. They're coming in and kind of taking all the space that we have. But I don't think that's the case.
No. So when we started the program back, in 25 years ago, Kingsport has 2 Malcolm Baldrige National Quality winners, Eastman and Powell's. And so the whole premise behind Malcolm Baldrige is that if you can't measure it, it doesn't count. So the question became, if we put all this money toward trying to attract people to live here from out of state, how are we going to know that they came here, and how are we going to measure the effect? So we started using water taps, because anybody that moves to the greater Kingsport area, you got to have water. So you come down and you turn your water system on, you give your proof of identification, your previous accounts, we know where you came from and where you moved to. And that we started tracking that data to satisfy that part of our requirement to measure success with Move to Kingsport. So we put a lot of time, energy, and effort into putting out maps, showing dot distributions of where everybody moved from out of state. And so it created, this is a perfect marketing thing. You're like, okay, so what if you're successful and now everybody thinks that everybody's moving here from out of state? We created that ourselves. The reality is that only 2% of people that are moving to Kingsport are coming from out of state. We just don't talk about the rest of them. And the reason we don't talk about the rest of them is because 25 years ago, when we set our goals, we said, look, if everybody's just shuffling the deck, moving around within the same region, you're not growing. You're truly growth. Growth comes from moving outside the region. So that's why we focused on that. So the 2% is newcomers from out of state, and it's a very important 2%, but the vast majority of activity takes place right within this region.
Wow. 2% seems low. Honestly, I would have guessed higher. For sure.
And especially in a part of the state that is so close to Virginia and to North Carolina, it doesn't take much to be out of state and move here. So for it to be that low, even in that context, I'm surprised by how
so
low that
we
number
set
is.
a measure that, again, using GIS background, we realized that you could create a 35-mile radius. And so if it's within a 35-mile radius as the crow flies, you can excerpt those zip codes. Okay. So we don't even count folks that live just outside, on the other side of the state line in Virginia. We only count folks that live from Marion and up. Wow. And so, that's why Virginia doesn't show up as one of our top out-of-state donors. Actually, it's Florida and North Carolina. Because if we did count folks that just moved from Gate City to Kingsport or something like that, it wouldn't be a true picture of what's happening in our region.
You think, because my experience obviously is my parents moving from north to south, but both Florida and North Carolina were moving south to middle part of the country. Is there something that's driving that? Is it economic? Is it, what was that looking like?
Well, the classic term is halfbacks. Okay. So they spent an entire career with the goal of retiring in Florida, because that's what you're supposed to do when you retire. And they get down there and they spend a couple of summers and realize that it's not spring all year round, and it's pretty hot. And
great place to visit.
And then the first couple of hurricanes hit, and they have a lot of patience to begin with, and then they don't anymore. And then their insurance starts going up. And then all of a sudden they think, well, maybe I'll just go halfway back. I don't want to go all the way back where I came from. Okay. We don't have a way of truly digging down and identifying those people. But anecdotally, they'll tell you, well, I moved here from Florida, but I'm originally from Pennsylvania.
Okay. So. That makes sense. No, and especially I think the insurance is a huge thing. Insurance companies have been driven out of Florida because of hurricanes and everything else. And for some of the major hurricane areas, now a lot of times it's either the state insurance provider or international providers, but United States-based insurance doesn't exist for a lot of Florida.
Or you really don't have any experience in with a hurricane, and you get down there and it hits, and then you realize that you're not insured enough.
Right.
And so they can't even build back what you lost. So there's just a lot of risk. And so the term that's used nationally now is climate risk, and they've started adding it to a lot more factors for telling where the best places to live are, and we get extra points because we're sheltered, by the mountains and 4-season climate, and the tornadoes tend to stop closer to Knoxville, and they don't tend to get here. And then hurricanes don't tend to get across the mountains; they tend to turn and go up the seaboard. Yeah. And that's not something that we can control, but it's something surely we can market.
Well, I think that's something we take for granted.
Oh, yeah.
We take everything for granted in our area. It's just been great for so long. It's hard to...
But the weather factor is a big deal. Yep. I've had conversations with people about this, because there's certain areas, whether it be the Gulf side or where down toward Miami, whatever, where hurricanes just happen often.
Right.
And if you've ever lived, which I've not, but if you ever lived through a hurricane, I would imagine that would be the last one you wanted to go through. So I can't fault people for wanting to get their family out of that. And especially when you tie in the insurance part, like Peter said, the risk is just outrageous. So it makes perfect sense to me that folks would want to get themselves out of that situation. Yeah. But to roll into another myth, a lot of people say that we're growing too fast.
Right.
So how do you approach that with someone who says, well, this is happening, but it's way too fast?
Right. So, we tend to broad brush things. And so in Tennessee, the Retired Tennessee program even started backing off a little bit because, there were so many people moving to Tennessee that there were concerns expressed by local officials, like we can't keep up with infrastructure, sewer, water, roads, schools, that sort of thing. And so to kind of bust that myth, I started looking at places in Tennessee and said, okay, where are the places that you hear people actively complaining about? It's not the place it used to be, or there's traffic is too high, or that sort of thing. And Middle Tennessee, of course, is the epicenter for all that. So Nashville is now identified the metro goes one county shy of Alabama all the way to the Kentucky line.
Holy cow.
And there's 2 million people in Nashville. Memphis has now dropped down to the third largest metro in the state. Knoxville is now second largest metro in the state. So Knoxville and Nashville are getting a ton of attention nationally. Tri-Cities is growing at a very healthy rate. So when you go to the census, they break down the growth sectors. So for example, they look at births, deaths, in-migration, and out-migration. And so the combination of those 4 things determines whether you're growing or not. Every single county and city in Northeast Tennessee, even the ones that we think are growing fast, are declining if you count deaths exceeding births. So if you don't replace that natural population loss, your economy will suffer. You're going to go in the wrong direction. So people moving in help offset that. Now the question is, how much do you need to offset so that you don't erode your quality of life, but you provide the economic shot in the arm that's required to sustain yourself? And working with Don Finley and some others, we came up with a 0.5% to 1% per year, or so 5% to 10% per decade is what you need just to make sure your economic situation is still vibrant. When you apply that for Kingsport, we are like 6.5%. So we're right between 5 and 10 over a decade. If I were talking to you about, say, Murfreesboro, for example, they were 80,000 population in 1980. They're 350,000 population now. That's not what we're interested in.
Right.
So if someone from Rutherford County is complaining about traffic being a bear, or, they have a point, but we're not them.
Sure.
And so we don't need to broad brush things like that. Other cities in our area they're not meeting that sustainable target. So they need to really be cognizant of that, or they're going to blink twice, and in 10 years, businesses are going to start closing, and it's not going to be a good thing.
Well, and I think we've been so lucky for so long with our setup. But it's human nature. If you go from there's one car on the road to there's 3,
right,
it feels like your traffic is increasing. But if you take a second and pull back and realize, well, if I was in Knoxville, I've gone from one car to 15 cars, that's bad traffic. And then you get to Atlanta and you're like, oh my God, that's even worse traffic. So yes, we've expanded and we've grown. People are just hard to change. And we see that, in what we do and whatever. But even, I remember I've got some friends who work for TDOT. Like when we put in a couple of the traffic circles. Yeah. Every piece of data says traffic circles work. But that first year or two, you heard nothing but these traffic circles are the devil to ours. And now nobody cares about it. And they make things better. But we learned how to drive when we stopped going just straight over the middle of them at Hobby Lobby. We've been so lucky so long, whether it's things like that or some of the others or, housing prices, all this, that, and the other. We've changed, but change isn't bad. Well, it's just different.
And Jeff, you kind of teetered into another myth about, our traffic being terrible.
Yeah, exactly.
So it sounds like in the long run, it's not so bad.
Right. So TDOT has a traffic history website. So if you ever want to cure insomnia, you can go check that out. But I'm always curious because like Highway 11W going into Hawkins County, there's basically one way in and out of Hawkins County from our area. And that is declining. That rate in the past 5 years has declined. So then you go to the Eastone Gateway up toward Target. That is declining. Memorial Boulevard going toward Bluntville is declining. I-26 toward Johnson City is declining. And so you think, wait a minute, if traffic's declining, that means the economy's not doing well and we must be suffering. Zoom out a little bit and I-26 just a little further out in the gray area is going up double digits. 11E between Johnson City and Bristol is going up double digits. I-81 toward the airport is going up double digits. So it's you're shifting things, shifting patterns. And we used to think about if you shop in your city, the city collects the sales tax. And since Tennessee does not have an income tax, that's really important. But they changed the law about 10 years ago. Now, if you buy something online, which has become more and more prevalent, you get to collect the taxes based on your population and your historic contribution to the overall state's sales tax. That's why it makes sense to have a development like the old Walmart parking lot at Stonegate, Stone Drive, and I-26 that sat empty for 15 years because when Walmart builds a new location, they put a legal restriction on the site they left that says nobody can occupy this site that sells anything we did. Well, who doesn't sell something that Walmart does?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So
dang it, Walmart. What are you doing?
It's called a category killer. And so you end up with this old parking field with grass growing up in it. And now there's 80 brand new homes that sold for $250,000 to $350,000 in the old Walmart parking lot. And I just envision the occupants of that home sitting there in the recliner watching TV, buying stuff with their mobile phone, and we're collecting sales taxes. So that's why it's important now to have as many people living in your city as it is just commerce and shopping centers.
Wow. That's interesting.
And I will just add that at the same time our traffic was going down, our sales tax collections went up 28%. So if sales tax collections were going down at the same time traffic was going down, you'd have a point about us declining. But it's really, to me, just about right sizing.
And we were talking before we came on air. It is one of those things. I'm sure I knew the Walmart rule at some point, but I'd forgotten it too. You don't know these things, right, and you assume, it's some lazy developer, somebody doesn't want to sell their property or whatever it is. And as soon as you dive into the reasonings why, you're like, a reasonable person would do the exact same thing.
Exactly.
But it's a lot easier to complain about things than it is to go and research things.
Exactly.
How does this look, Jeff, when it comes to our schools and the fear of overpopulation? I think that's a myth that our schools are kind of being overrun and overtaken.
Sure.
How does that fit into the mold?
So going back to the Middle Tennessee example, my son is in a high school coach. And so he works at 6A high school. And so he's always curious, do we have another 6A high school on the horizon so we don't have to drive to Knoxville to play people?
Jeez,
And
6A is big.
Yeah, and so of course the new Sullivan County High School is 6A, but it was the combination of closing 3 other schools to combine them. It wasn't because of growth; it was for efficiency,
consolidation.
Right. And so when you look at the next closest new high school, it's West Knoxville, and so going on into Middle Tennessee. A new high school just opened, Green Hill High School. It opened in 2020. The day it opened its doors, it was 6A. It's between Mount Juliet and Lebanon. So now Mount Juliet is 6A, Wilson Central is 6A, Lebanon is 6A, Gallatin is 6A. In Rutherford County, they have 9 6A high schools. We have to go to Knoxville to put together a team, and to put together a district to make it work. So that's just one way of saying that we're not filling our schools or overfilling our schools. If you go to the census again and look at how many students we had or how many people we had under 18, that includes people who are still preschool, it was about 10,800. And if you look at it now, it's still about 10,800. So 5 years later. So even though we're growing, it doesn't necessarily mean that every family has 2 kids or 4 kids or whatnot. It's a lot more complex than that. Fewer families even have kids these days.
Yeah.
So
where do you think the impression that our schools are overflowing comes from? And as a parent of kids in city schools who've gone through, elementary, middle, and now I've got one in high school, I've never felt that personally.
Right.
So when I hear it, I always wonder what's creating that impression.
So when all the planning was happening in Western Sullivan County and the consideration of building the new high school, we had a lot of students that were in the city that went to the county high school by choice. And the question was, are they going to continue at the county high school if they move the school, or are they going to come into the city school system? So for a while, there was a lot of unknown about the impact of just the shuffling of the deck of kids. So it didn't come from parents. The perception came from school administrators who were just wanting to stay on top of things and make sure that they weren't caught by surprise. And so, John Adams Elementary School opened, 10 years ago or so?
Right.
And when it initially opened, there was a question if they could even fill it or not. And now it's right at the 500 pupil mark. And they did some reshuffling to send some kids back to, other schools that
Right.
had capacity. But when you look at it in aggregate, we have ample capacity. The conversations that are taking place right now on the 2 new elementary schools are, again, replacement schools for like they're consolidating 3 schools in one situation, and they're expanding another school in another situation. So,
well, and especially with the capital expenditure of a school to operate, especially an older one that has HVAC issues or
Right.
roofing issues, like people don't necessarily realize, it's going to cost $20 million to put a new
Right.
roof on, or whatever the number happens to be.
Right.
And I could see where, especially with the shift to having West Ridge,
Right.
combined, and I was a Sullivan South person, and
Yeah.
I still wave that banner. But now my kids going through DB and whatnot, I could see, with the annexation of Colonial Heights,
Yep.
the feeling of like, oh well, are those people, instead of going now out to West
Right.
Ridge, are they going to flood into our schools?
Right.
But like I said, if the data doesn't support it, it's
Right.
just
Right.
noise.
Change is very, very hard, especially when it comes to your kids.
Yeah.
And so you just try to be as respectful as possible. I did put together a realtor's guide to regional schools because you brought up a great point about cost and roofs and that sort of thing. Many of the city's facilities are 60 to 90 years old. And some of the neighborhoods that you have to drive through to get to your designated school, kind of, you raise an eyebrow like, who am I going to fit in this neighborhood, that sort of thing. And so rather than look at things superficially, looked at the test scores. And I was very pleasantly surprised to find that John F. Kennedy and Theodore Roosevelt elementary schools, which we took over from the county 30 years ago, those facilities haven't changed that much other than just us maintaining them and trying to make sure that, they're in the best shape they can be. They scored better than Town Acres in Johnson City, for example.
Okay.
And so, our lowest scoring schools in our system was about 11th in the region out of 43 school districts. And so that's why I'm so passionate about public schools, because when I see the Dobyns Bennett marching band on a Friday night, I know that about 50% of those kids really can't afford to be there. But the fact that they're able to participate in music and learn an instrument, it's firing the same circuitry in their minds that's going to grow math and science skills, and it's going to change the trajectory of those kids' lives.
For sure. We just had the winter concert. What was that, 2 nights ago? Henry's he plays trombones in the band. And at one point I leaned over to my wife and said, between the two bands, I was like, that's $150,000, $200,000 worth of musical equipment.
Right.
Not to mention staff, time, effort, all the things. And we take our public education for granted. Throw that in the column too. We were talking, if you had to add private school costs on top of your cost of living, it evens things out in a lot of cases.
A lot of folks think about those special programs and think it's fluff. But Kingsport City Schools has a way of saying we want to educate the whole child. And so whether you're STEM or robotics or music or orchestra or athletics, we want you to have the best opportunity to fulfill who you are that we can possibly provide you.
Yeah. And we do a tremendous job at it. We really do. Everything could always be better, but
sure,
it's nature.
Well, I think really the crux of all of these things is it sounds like we're just a little spoiled with what we've had forever. Right. And I don't really fault anyone for that. When you've been in an area for 40 years or however long you've been there, it's just second nature to you. And it's hard for us to kind of see the value in what we have. But clearly we have a lot to offer, whether it be the cost of living or the amenities that we have or the different kind of things we have coming into the region. There's a lot of advantages of being here. I'm partial to the mountains.
Yeah,
they're
absolutely
great. Who wouldn't want to live here? I mean, it's just
exactly.
But I saved this myth for last because I know that it can be a passionate one and people get all wound up because it. But so coming from a local standpoint, a lot of folks talk about they can't afford a home because all of these new folks are moving into the area and they're driving the home prices up. Right. So they're essentially saying it kind of leaves locals in a bind, but we're kind of thinking that's a myth, right?
Right. So the world changed in 2008 when the Great Recession happened. Before that, they're very lenient mortgage terms, and a lot of folks were taking advantage of that, and they were over leveraged. And then the house of cards all came tumbling down, and so many of those rules got changed, and the pendulum swung back in a different direction. So, it's not. This phenomenon is nationwide. Mm-hmm. It's not just Kingsport. And we desperately need to do something about affordability of housing. But we went, since 2008, across the country not building enough houses to meet demand. What is the classic law of economics? Supply and demand. If you don't have enough supply, the demand is going to be higher. It's going to drive the prices up. So we need more construction to meet the demand. So that is not influenced, it may be a little influenced by people moving from out of state, but we have a much deeper issue than that's happening.
Yeah, we actually did a podcast on that. We talked about homes several times because that's a hot topic for clients, for everyone in the area, but that's essentially what it boiled down to. We haven't done a good job of keeping, the houses being built.
Yep.
And you eventually run out of houses. Right. There's only so many that can go around. And now it seems like we're in this mad dash, kind of a scramble of sorts, trying to get homes on the ground. Right. And seems like a mess that I'm glad I'm not involved in. But
there's, I find that Americans are fickle about really much anything. They want the restaurant they want at the price they're willing to pay for it, not what the market requires.
Sure.
And same thing with houses. They don't realize how much lumber costs, how much land costs, just all the inputs that go into what a house costs when it hits the market. And so when a developer comes in that is trying to make as affordable housing as possible, puts them a little closer together, uses a little less granite and more Formica countertops, things like that. It's really providing people an opportunity for home ownership that they may not otherwise have.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than criticize those folks, we ought to be grateful that they're willing to build in our area, because otherwise we're not going to have new housing at that price point.
Sure.
Well, and I think another thing that we've seen too is the concept of a starter home that can be improved is really harder in today's economics with supply chain and the costs of lumber and all the things. It's not like you can take a, let's call it $100,000 home. And I realize for other people, your price point reference is going to be different. Add $50,000 to it and have, what you want.
Right.
Now it's more that $100,000 home needs $200,000 put into it to have, So it's not necessarily like the myth is that everybody coming from out of state. We do have out of state buyers. We do have, I think that's one of the things that we've seen a little bit that I hadn't experienced, and this was more coming out of COVID, was that sight unseen cash buyer type thing. So anecdotally, it feels that way. And it's cheaper to live here. We've talked about cost of living a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So we should be pleased, because if someone can sell a home in California for $1 million, buy a really nice home here for $400,000, that's $600,000 that they can be putting into our community, right, whether it's through their investments yielding things that they spend in our stores or whatever it is. So is it tougher, especially in the lower house price range? Yeah, but that's supply and demand has driven those prices up.
Talking about economics. As a city planner, the old model used to be the closer you were to the center of town, the edge neighborhoods were declining, and then you kept sprawling out further, and that was the model for years. Now, because demand is so high, it has created an environment where people are willing to invest in older homes. Okay. And so, I very much appreciate responsible home flippers that come in and take a house and make it, shore it up for another 50 or 60 years worth of life. And then the buyer can make a choice. I can live closer into town, maybe a little less elbow room, maybe it's a smaller square footage, but it's still in a great school district. It has, it's built like a battleship as compared to new construction, which is, it's just the way it is. I mean, my son has a detached garage that I could barely put a screw in the wall because the wood was so hard. That's the kind of wood they used in 1950. They don't use that kind of wood today.
No.
So
that is a big difference. The quality, quality of products.
Yeah.
The products quality is just not there. And
right.
then when you try to get that quality, to your point, that's when the pricing starts going up really quick.
Right.
But, I'm not a realtor. I'm just a normal guy, but
you did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
I didn't. Not last night, but I have stayed in a Holiday Inn. But, you were talking, Jeff, about the steady growth of population, that, 1% every year. So it really kind of seems to me like it matches well with the real estate as well, because you want a steady growth of homes being built.
Right.
And I think we've just kind of missed that a little bit.
Right.
And unfortunately, homes are not something that you can just throw up in 2 months.
Right.
They take some time. But I am seeing a lot of homes being built. Like you were talking about, I live in Greenville and I commute here to Kingsport. And between my drive, there's lots of homes popping up. I know that there's a whole nother group of folks who are frustrated because people are selling farmland and people are building on it, but I just don't see it.
Yeah.
I still see a lot of the beauty in Tennessee. Now, it might not be down your stretch of road, but Greenville, for example, is like the 5th largest county, maybe. I don't know, Jeff, you probably know that. In the state of Tennessee.
Size-wise, yes.
There's land everywhere.
Yeah.
You're just not looking for it.
Yeah.
It's like there's land everywhere. But I think it all boils down to this. We just need to let people know this information.
Yeah.
We just need to get it out to people. And like Peter said earlier, it's a lot easier to just complain about it.
Yeah.
But whatever we can do to kind of get ahead of that, why not?
Yeah, it's, as an old city planner, I think about back in the day, you would build one phase of a subdivision and you'd stub the street out for the next phase. And over the course of 30 years, you would have a main road that went from one collector road to another collector road. And so you had two ways to get out. Nowadays, it's like everybody wants one little enclave with one entrance and a bunch of cul-de-sacs. And then the next adjoining piece of property develops the same way. And then to get from this place to that place, you've got to get on the main road and go back around. So you're forcing all that traffic to the main road. So a lot of the challenge, in my opinion, is just traditional city planning challenges. It's if you take every farm as it exists on Highway 93 between here and Greenville, and you put one subdivision on each farm and don't connect them together somehow, you're going to have a problem on Highway 93 because they all have to depend on that one corridor.
Sure.
But that's the inconvenient truth that folks don't like to really think about.
There's so much information on this stuff, and I appreciate that because that shows that there's people paying attention.
Yeah.
And I love at the very beginning, you said, we're using data. This is how we make decisions.
Right.
That's how every industry makes decisions now because they have it.
Yep.
And why not make an educated decision rather than shooting from the
Right.
hip? So what would be your message to folks who might have some of these myths on their brain?
Just be open-minded and, do your research and don't be hypercritical of your local government, wherever that is. They're trying to do the best they can to make the best community they can. I know that I'm a native of this area, so I never lived anywhere else, and I don't want to be biased. So the way I try not to be biased is I do the math, I do the research, and believe me, if I find some place that I think stacks up better than here, I'll probably move there, but I have looked at hundreds and hundreds of situations in the past 25 years, and I have yet to find one that makes more sense for me and my family.
Yeah.
And so, so I'm happy to stay for that reason. But a lot of folks, will watch a YouTube or they'll read an article and then they'll jump to a conclusion, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Look at the bones, and we have great bones. We have great natural environment, and you just can't, while the grass is always seemingly greener elsewhere, it isn't really greener.
Well, it's like those people you're talking about in Florida. They go there for a couple of years and they experience it and they're like, nope.
Yep.
This is not what the magazine showed.
Our high school class, surprisingly to me, has been very vigilant about having our high school reunions. And so every 10 years, we've had a chance to get back together, and I stayed and many of them didn't. And it's amazing how many of them regret leaving. And so, before you leave for, a better situation that really isn't better, do your homework.
Look at the facts.
Yeah. Well, and we haven't talked about, I've heard you talk about before, we are so connected from here to all the various parts of the world, especially the United States. You can be in New York. It always surprised me. I think about, like Daniel Boone cutting across, and it's like, well, I can be in New York in 2 hours, type thing. With some of our flights, we're very connected, and our situation where we sit geographically enables us to be in a lot of places. And I do think that if people of our area who are critical took a little bit of time and visited various places, they would realize, but it's that old expression, I haven't been, step outside my own hometown type thing, but when you do, you start to look back and say, there's a reason why, people are telling me to stay and why it's a good place to move to.
Yeah. Jeff, how do you do under pressure?
Okay, I can think.
Because this is the lightning round.
Okay, sounds good.
We need lights or something to
put it in post.
The whole idea is I'll ask you a few questions and you just answer them as quick as you can.
Okay.
But the most important question I'm going to ask you today is, what is the best cereal of all time?
Best cereal for me is Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Quality.
Quality.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, you can tell a lot about people by what cereal they say. Because you can kind of, I go through the decades and I remember all the cereals. I don't know, it just seems fun. Cinnamon Toast Crunch is a staple.
Yep. You know, I think about some of the stuff you see about how America changed and all. And did you see Unfrosted on Netflix?
No, I haven't.
The evolution of Pop-Tarts and how it was discovered and all this stuff. And I realized that, you know, me and my generation are a victim of sugary stuff. And,
Absolutely.
And our whole taste of what is sweet and what is not sweet is so much different.
I also don't trust people that eat unfrosted Pop-Tarts. I don't get it.
I think if you're eating an unfrosted Pop-Tart or a non-sweet cereal, you're doing it wrong. Like, there's not a point. There's other options. Have something savory, you know, but if you're having that, it should be, you know, I'm not looking for my health to come from cereal or Pop-Tarts.
Sure.
So as someone who was raised in the 60s, I have now developed type 2 diabetes.
Oh, Jeff.
So
you're not helping our cause here on the cereal.
I've started using this continuous monitor. And so the doctor was asking me how I'm liking it. I said, man, I'm a data nerd. I love this because I can eat something and then just look at my phone. It'll tell me when my sugar's spiking. And so it's helping me understand what not to eat. And
absolutely.
Cinnamon Toast Crunch is one of those things.
Still worth it.
Great decision.
Said the non-diabetic.
You got to make your choices.
For all of our
world.
medical professional listeners, sorry.
I could be your future buddy.
I'm not your health advisor. I'm your financial advisor.
Okay, another fun question. What would be your one superpower if you could have just one?
Oh, I'm not sure if this is a superpower or not, but I would love to be the guy on TikTok or the person like Oprah that just is able to surprise people with huge gifts.
Oh, yeah.
And benevolence. And
I've not heard that one yet. That's actually really cool.
Yeah, I would love that.
Now I feel superficial about my previous answers on the lightning round. But no, that's tremendous.
I kind of want to fly, Jeff.
Yeah.
It's going to be mine.
I know.
We'll let you do the Lord's work and I'll just be flying around.
I know there's several churches in the area that do a program during Valentine's Day where it's called Love Your City. And they have different, you know, coordinated efforts. And apparently Christians don't tip very well, especially on Sundays.
I've heard that.
And so to change that, there's a 100% tip challenge. And I love that.
That's cool.
I love doing that. And not for any, you know, the whole idea is do it and leave before anybody finds out, not for attention or anything like that. But it just, you know, I just feel like the more positive seeds you can plant, the more it ripples out and the world becomes a little kinder place.
Yeah. Some of the best things you can do are give in secret.
Yep. Absolutely.
I've been fortunate enough to be able to start doing that more and more. And I feel like I get something out of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, now, don't everybody get crazy and start asking me for money because it ain't like that. I mean, like, I'm talking like $20 baseball team here and this, that.
Right.
But, I'm waiting to be behind you in Pals and expect you to be paying for my meal.
Can you imagine how frustrating it is for Pals? Because in this area, everybody's so kind. It's like, well, I'm going to pay for the person behind me. And then you pull up and somebody says, well, they paid for you. Well, I'm going to pay for them. Yeah. And so now they're just a person behind for who knows how long.
All day. Just keeps going.
Well, to wrap up here, if someone else was describing you, what are some of the things you would hope they'd say about you?
That I love my family, I love my faith, I love my community. That's what would really mean the most to me. And I guess to summarize all that I made a difference and left things a little better than I found them.
Yeah,
so
I could see that.
That's what really motivates me.
You seem pretty true to that. I think that's a good synopsis of Mr. Jeff Fleming.
Well, I appreciate that. I had a conversation with a guy this morning, and he said thank you, and I said, you don't understand how much I value thank you more than I do money. So
we do truly appreciate you being here and sharing this time with us, and not only this, but you know. You're Mr. Kingsport. You've done so much for our area that people who have no idea what you've done to lift up our community and to make it a better place, they get to experience that even without knowing it. So
yeah, Jeff, I don't know that everyone could really do what you do in this capacity, because we joked around the beginning about people being frustrated, and Lord knows if you're on Facebook, everyone's frustrated. it takes a certain person to be able to kind of bridge that gap between people. And you've always had a very calming, very confident demeanor when presenting that stuff. So we appreciate that, because we need more calm and, confident to disrupt our chaos. We need to be more centered on that. But I encourage everyone to go check out, it's movetokingsport.com.
Movetokingsport.com and also kingsportspirit.com.
Kingsportspirit.com.
Yep. If there's one more thing I could add, years ago when the Target Center was being developed here in Kingsport, the International Shopping Center Council is always held in Las Vegas because it has like 50,000 delegates, and that's the only convention center that could really handle that. So we got out there, and the developer called me up and said, "Hey, would you be interested in going to the Retail Christian breakfast with me?" And I said, "There is one?" And he said, "Yeah, it's at 6:00. And so we went.
6:00?
And I figured that there would be nobody there, but it was literally standing room only. I mean, every seat, every table. And it's sponsored by Lifeway Books. Okay. And they always brought an author in. And so I forget the guy's name now, but the name of the book was From Success to Significance. And he was a developer. And he goes, I could build infrastructure. I could build shopping centers. I could build, faux main streets. And I kept saying, "Lord, surely there's something more that you want from me." And he realized that because of everything he had done in the past, if he picked up the phone and called the CEO of Home Depot or Lowe's, they would take the call because he was that kind of customer. And so he leveraged that relationship to do mission work. He said, "I realized if I'm putting in infrastructure, I could do that in Haiti just as well as I could do it in a shopping center." And so that always motivated me. And I kept thinking, what is the sum of all the things I've learned and experienced in my career, and how can I put them to work in the last phase of my life? And that's really, I feel like I've hit that sweet spot, and that's what I really enjoy doing.
That's great. Jeff, thank you. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. I know it took us some time to get this on the calendar, but I'm glad we did.
Yeah, me too.
This is fun.
Let's do it again.
Let's do it again. We'll do it again. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks again to Jeff for being our special guest. Peter, you did a great job, as always.
Hey, I show up and talk. I don't know if I ever said that. I do.
Go check us out, afiadvisors.com. Follow us on all of our social channels, and we will be back in a couple of weeks with a new guest. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Bullseye Podcast. Do you want to sponsor the show, or maybe even be a guest? Contact us at connect@afiadvisors.com to get the conversation started. Thank you for all of the continued support.